I think the next thing which I like to focus in on is retention. What are you trying to do when you say you want to retain talent? Are you just trying to retain it because you need it in this moment? Are you trying to retain it to be attractive to others to come in because you're trying to grow? Why are you so keen to retain this talent in your organization? Because a lot of the time, if you understand the why, you'll have a fighting chance of actually retaining the talent that you want. And the most important thing to me is the exit conversation. Why did my talent leave? I have no problems with my talent leaving. In fact, I encourage my talent to leave because as I believe, talent attracts talent. What I want to know is that they're leaving with a good news story, not a poor news story, because that's a different problem. And for me, sometimes the exit conversation gets overlooked because we're so focused on trying to, what do they need to pass over to my next colleague? And you're so focused on trying to fix the problem here, you're not quite looking ahead to say, actually, why did that individual leave? And what could we have done to prepare them to leave or prepare them to stay, as I said in the montage, stay within your network, within your supply chain, within another part of your organization, if you're lucky enough to have an organization big enough to hold them. And then the next bit is to try and understand, where are your results? All right? It's easy to say the results are your dollars and cents, your pounds and pence, your yens. That's what you're trying to make. But is it? For a lot of companies now, there is social responsibilities that you're trying to achieve. There is a certain branding that you're trying to achieve. Now, if you understand those results and you understand why you're trying to gain those results, what you can also find out from those results is, what retention do you need? Do you need 100% retention of all your talent because you're only a team of 5 and that's all you've got? And if one person leaves, that's a big deal. That's a totally different retention plan. But that depends if those individuals are imperative to the results you're trying to aim for. What is the environment you're trying to work towards? If it's based on the results, based on the strategy, which I was saying earlier, you have the whys. So the retention and the environment will help you, and hopefully it becomes cyclical, and then you can figure out how your results are impacted by the decisions that you made. Now, if you like to think, at the first slide I showed you was what I think, the second slide is what I hope to get right. All of those are great, but they take time. So I always believe in these presentations that I like to try and give away maybe just 1 or 2 things that you can do right now, today, or tomorrow, if that's how you feel, or in the next 5 minutes. Again, what I hope these next 3 things are just little takeaways, little things that I genuinely do, and my colleagues will all admit that they've seen me do them in my career at some point. And thankfully, some of my colleagues are even in the building today, so no doubt you can track them down and verify it for yourself. But the 5-word vision. Can you describe your strategy in 5 words? It's not about how many words it takes you to do it. If it took you 15 words yesterday, but next week it takes you 35, why? Has your strategy moved? The other thing about it is, are you using consistently, without writing it down, the same words in your head every time you try this task? I try to do it once a month. Nothing more than that, but can I do it? And does it change? And does the words change? Because then you can start to see very quickly course correct. Because if it needs a course correcting, it goes back to those 6 things I said earlier. Do I now need to go and start talking, communicating? Do I now need to get my Vogue on and start communicating again to my team? But it's also, do I need to start changing my goals? How many of you have probably sat here and had the goals set for you in January, March, and it's the same goals you have at the end of the year? All right? So that's where that comes in. It isn't about trying to do it in 5 words. But if you can, it also means that when I communicate it to my team, there's less interpretation. So there's less chance for those decisions that I said earlier to be made differently. The next one, talent retention plan. I bet you many of you in your organization somewhere, if your building was to stop working for whatever reason, you'll probably have a building continuity plan, what you do in those incidences. I bet you if your IT collapses, I bet you have a disaster recovery plan. Talent retention plan, the single most important resource you have are your people. But have you got a plan for what would happen if, not just the key people, just your people choose to leave, aren't happy, or they are happy and they still choose to leave? What is your retention plan, and have you set it out? And that retention plan isn't just your people today. How are you going to hire tomorrow to make sure that there's a steady flow? How are you going to make sure that the people who are here today leave the legacy so that your culture continues? And I know many leaders don't like to say it, but what happens if you choose to leave? How do you make sure that your team that you've built up, you've engaged with, you've committed with over hopefully a period of time, how are you going to make sure that if, for whatever reason, you have to leave, that they will be okay? That should be in your talent retention plan. And again, it's a skeleton. You start off with just a skeleton. Who's in your team? What do they do? How did they get into your team? Was it from another part of the organization? So do you have a high percentage of just talent coming from other parts of the organization? Or is it just from the same recruiter? So have you got the diversity of thought? So again, that'll help you. And it's a skeleton. It's a Word document. That's it. And then it builds over time. And every exit plan that you do should help build that. Every entry that comes in should help build that. And it becomes a living document. And then finally there, the 1 minute focus. I think for me, that is the one I try to do. That's the one I try to do on the train, the bus, or if my 8-year-old will allow it, even in my own house. Very much the 1 minute focus for me is what it says. I try, with various levels of success, but I do try every morning to have 1 minute and just set myself, what is that focus? Complete silence, not a phone anywhere, somewhere where I cannot be distracted, just for 1 minute and go, what is the one thing? Is it the difficult customer that I have to deal with? Is it, having to be prepared for this? What is that 1 minute? And what I have found over time is that 1 minute helps me realize, have I got my calendar right? Now, I might not change my calendar that day. I'll just get on with what I said I was going to do. But what it does do is that if I keep getting the same things over and over again, and I keep not delivering what I think is my 1 minute focus, then something needs to change. My calendar needs to change. Maybe I need to delegate that task away. Maybe I'm not the right person to do it. That's why it's scaring me so much. So I think for me, those are the 3 takeaways. Each of them can be done today. They don't take anything more than a little bit of thought, a piece of paper, and 1 minute of your time. And that's it. And those can help you hopefully define those 6 things and take you along on that journey. So it's all good and well. It's been sort of 20 minutes, and I hope you've got something out of this, if nothing else, the bad jokes. But for me, if nothing else, this is what I like to summarize how I think leadership should always be thought about. It's by Maya Angelou. She's like an adopted grandmother in my house, to be perfectly honest. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. And we'll all sit here and we can all name that manager that you probably don't even work for now. You don't even know why, but that was the manager that you just walked through walls for, and you don't know why. And those are the type of managers who have probably built that culture that have just made you want to do that. They're the managers who have made you feel really empowered. Those are the managers who have probably helped you be the leaders that you are today, or the leaders you hope to be tomorrow. So with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's organized this event. Thank you for everyone here who's laughed at my jokes. Feel for my wife who's heard me say them quite a few times as I've practiced this. So thank you all. If you have any questions, it'll be great. I'll hand back to you, Esther.
Wonderful, thank you. Well, I have to say that did not disappoint. And if I can just say, the way you made me feel during that was very inspired. At points terrified, because I was like, oh, I've got to do this. Happy that I've only got to knock 2 words out of my vision, because it's 7 words. I wrote it down there. So yeah, no, absolutely fabulous. So we're going to have some time for questions. If we've got a couple of mics roaming around the audience, maybe I could just kick things off, because I've got a load of questions after the top of that. I love the fact that you say that we should do 5-word visions, talent retention plans, and 1-minute focus. Is that something that you think that you would encourage your teams to do as well as the leaders? So do you think that's something that should cascade throughout the team, certainly in terms of the focus? Obviously, maybe not the retention plan.
Yeah. Yeah, it's depending if they like me or not. They might be writing a whole different retention plan to get rid of me. But I think for me personally, I think the best way to do those things is to be seen to do it, because everyone works differently. So that works for me, all right? Anyone who knows me, anyone who works with me, I wake up wide awake at 100 miles an hour. And actually, those things are to actually slow me down, to put the brakes on, to give me a moment to think. Now, my wife will not be embarrassed to say she's the exact opposite. You know, she needs about 6 coffees before she gets going. So some of those things may or may not work for her. But in essence, what you do need is the sentiment which you need to be there is to actually be thinking about what are you doing and why are you doing it? And that's the sentiment which is coming across, and that's how I use that.
Lovely, thank you. Certainly is a practice that I've been trying to implement with me and my team, and it's good. It is good, but it is, as you say, it's interesting. You don't necessarily have to change your calendar to adjust to it, because that's my thing. Sorry. Now I'm getting into a personal mentoring session myself. Any questions from the floor before I continue getting some leadership advice? We've got one over here. Oh, can we get a microphone for you?
I love the presentation, thank you. Just looking at the last few years and how leadership in the workplace has changed, and then looking forward to the future, when you think about leadership, what additional things should leaders be considering for the future of work?
Great question.
Thank you. So I think for me, so first of all, I did an editorial with you guys just before this, and I think for me the key thing is to start spinning back round and actually starting to reevaluate the status quo. Whatever that status quo was, let's just start having that honest conversation about the reevaluation, because once you start that reevaluation, you can then start looking at what the future will hold. I do think there is some leadership traits that will always hold about caring for your people, understanding your people. I think those will always hold. But I think what might change is the delivery of that. So, like for instance, if I said 10 years ago that colleagues would be looking me up on LinkedIn, that might not have happened. Now, you've got to make sure that you have a presence there so that they get to know you, so they can evaluate, is that the type of person they want to work for, and is that the culture that they want to work within? So back to that earlier point about building up your culture and then leading from there. That hopefully will also attract the talent that you want, because they will be bought in before they've even come for the interview into your culture.
Lovely, thank you. Any more questions I've got a quick one just whilst people think. You mentioned about being a mentee and then becoming a mentor. How did you find that shift? And are you still a mentee and a mentor, or have you shifted from mentee
I am
to mentor?
always the mentee, no matter which way round it is. Because what I found is that I'm a mentee right now. I've got 2 or 3 mentors for various parts. But I also find that when I am mentoring, I find that a lot of things I take for granted, like writing up a CV. Well, actually, the CV I've got now is not what an 18-year-old or a 20-year-old or someone who's in the military who wants to transfer into the industry. And actually sitting down with them challenges my assumptions about my own CV, challenges about my own assumptions about my own thought processes. But it also helps me reevaluate, am I still relevant for when I'm interviewing? Is my interviewing process appropriate as I always thought it was? And that also helps. So yes, to answer your question, yes, I do feel like I'm a mentor and a mentee most of the time.
That's excellent. Has anyone else got any questions around mentoring, or perhaps maybe I could ask another one then? Sorry, I do feel like I am just taking the floor here.
Don't worry, it's just
our
personal
But I have a list of questions.
No, don't worry, it's just me and you, okay? There's no one else in the room.
So my next question was in terms of, so this really struck a chord with me. Allowing your teams to come up with ideas that terrify you and how to experiment on them. So I have a very small team.
Yep.
And a very exclusive set of clients. So how do you create a sandbox, and how do you explain to your team when things don't work? Is it going back to your facts and your figures, or How do we do the experiments when they go right and they go wrong?
When they go right and when they go wrong. So I think the first thing is actually, if it's an experiment, there shouldn't be a right or wrong.
Yeah.
By the definition, for me, it's about the exploration. So first of all, it's to try, and as a leader, my gut feeling is that there is always a right or wrong, or that's an inefficient use of the time of my colleagues. So first of all, it's to try and see what value are they trying to get to. Why do they want to try that approach? But also, hopefully, when they come up with the idea, you've had the conversation about the strategy. So hopefully, when they're coming up with the idea, it's relevant to what you're trying to do. So therefore, that takes a little bit of the trepidation away from myself as a leader. And then I think the other element about it is, in advance, is actually setting up that sandbox, that soundbox, that set of people that you trust, that you don't mind your team going out and saying things to them. So to your point, you will have long-term clients, ones which are very close to where you can say, well, actually, we've got this great idea, but we've tested it in-house, but we need to test it here. And then setting up that parameters. The great thing about that is you'll normally find a lot of your innovation will come from the newest member in the team. So that will also allow them to meet your clients, allow them to feel like they're exploring what they're doing, and hopefully reinforce the strategy. Because if it's a success, brilliant, it links back to your strategy, brilliant. If it's not a success and it's because it was successful but not relevant, then you can say, well, look, it was successful, but how does that help? And that can help people buy into the strategy more. So for me, it's to try and always link it back to your strategy, so therefore everyone feels like, I know what this innovation's meant to do.
Lovely, thank you. Perfect. So I will be calling Marion, my client, later on. We've got a question at the back, and then we've got one at the front just here, and then another one at the back.
Bob, thanks for a really interesting speech there. I'm interested in your thoughts around, as leaders, we want to be more person-centered. We want to think about the individual rather than the task or the role that they perform. But equally as well, when we look up the way, the demand is on percentages, facts, figures, numbers, deliverables, KPIs. How do you find the sweet spot between the two? How
do I find the sweet spot between the two? First of all, I come from an actuarial background, so facts and figures is all that I live off. So you can imagine, I too will struggle with that. I think the best way I try to look at it is actually, what do those numbers mean? So, not to use jargon, but anyone's got a key performance indicator, all right? They'll say something like 35% or above or whatever. What does that actually mean? So for you as the leader, you have to report back up in the terms that they understand. But how do you convert that? So what does 35% actually mean to the marketing element of your team, for instance? What does that mean? So that would be the first thing I would try to do. The second thing is actually get your team to write the KPIs they want to be responsible for. And try, when you're reporting back up, say, we've got your 35%, but we're also measuring ourselves on the well-being of our team or the retention plan within my team. So you're actually reporting what they want to hear and what your team wants to hear. And that allows you as a leader to show you're listening to your team, allows your management above you to see that there is other measurements that they might not be even aware of. Because that's the other part. They're asking for measurements that they know. They might not be aware of the measurements that you want to give them. So bringing those together, and that I have found helps with that conversation above. But if nothing else, it will at least allow your team to see that it isn't just the facts and figures that you care about.
Lovely, thank you. A great way to get accountability as well. Perfect. Yeah. We had a question down at the front. Can I get a mic over for this lady here? Thank you.
Hi there. You started your conversation on talking about how important culture was within leadership. Do you have any advice around organisations as they grow? You obviously have a lot of talent turnover, but you have people who've been there for a long time, and how you bring them along as culture has to change, and they look at how things have always been like this, and you're trying to drag people along with you sometimes. Do you have any advice around that?
I think it's I think it's back to what I was saying there earlier about actually how many people in here has had their objectives changed. If I was to take a show of hands and said, how many of you have had your objectives changed at any point this year? That, for me, is a sign that actually that's how your culture can change. The reason it's sometimes a shock to people is that they will literally have had maybe the same objectives or the same ways of working. And then all of a sudden, even though the leader in their own mind has been moving the dial, it will seem like a sudden shock, especially to someone who's been in the team for a long time. So it's actually, have you changed little things continuously to get to that big jump at the end? So that's the way I look at it. There should always be a bit of a run-up, and then, yes, any change, you need to do a big jump, but it's actually, have you guided them to say there is going to be changes through their goals, through the way you've been communicating? Have you been hinting at where you think the journey is going before you get there?
Lovely. Thank you. And then the gentleman at the back, would you want to ask a question?
I've got a quick question on creativity. So in my team, we employ a lot of junior staff and apprentices as well.
Yeah.
We're in financial services, so technology-wise, we're not always ahead of the game, as you probably know. As they're junior, we see a lot of people come in from degrees, and you know, the expectation of the technology and the reality are two different things. How do you, I guess, encourage creativity, but also try and not discourage them because the technology is quite far behind?
So, first of all, catch me after this, because I've got a list as long as you are, because youth development is something I really am passionate about. So please catch me after this, and I will definitely sit down and talk to you a bit in more detail. But to answer that question really quickly, I think the key thing is actually saying, this is where we are, this is where your knowledge is, and this is the gap, and this is where you want, how can you help us invest in that technology? So first of all, that's one part. And then the second part about it is, okay, imagine now that you've only got these tools. What can you do with those tools? Because the real creativity is, and if you talk to any chef, or especially chefs, I love talking to chefs, because they just get given ingredients sometimes in a restaurant, or it just doesn't turn up, but they still got to make a menu. So that's the way I always try to say, these are the ingredients we've got, let's build with what we've got, but also, how do we invest so that we can get the other ingredients that you want? And that way, it helps them see that we are on that journey. And it might not be as quick as they would want, but it still allows them to use that same creativity, but then stretching them to use it for whatever you've got around in the cupboards.
Wonderful, thank you. What a wonderful way to leave it, almost on a ready, steady cook vibe. Thank you so much, Nick. That was absolutely brilliant. Nick did say, you heard him, that you can go and talk to him afterwards if you've got more questions. He's obviously a wealth of knowledge. I will be finding you at lunchtime to run through the rest of my questions. We'd like you to join me in a big round of applause for Nick. Thank you for a wonderful talk.
Thank you.